The morning I received the official complaint letter from the Willowbrook Homeowners Association about my heated driveway. I was standing in my garage wearing nothing but sweatpants and holding a cup of coffee, watching the snow melt automatically off my concrete while my neighbors scraped ice off their windshields in the freezing Minnesota winter. The letter was printed on expensive cream-colored cardstock with raised lettering, and it accused me of energy waste, environmental irresponsibility, and setting a bad example for the community. I read it 3 times before the absurdity really sank in. My name is Quentin Xavier, and I had moved to Edna, Minnesota just 18 months earlier after accepting a position as a risk management consultant for a major insurance firm in Minneapolis. The job paid well, the house was beautiful, and the neighborhood seemed perfect until I learned what living under an HOA really meant. I had installed the radiant heating system in my driveway during my first winter here after watching an elderly woman slip on her icy driveway 3 houses down and break her hip. The medical bills and lawsuit that followed for that household were astronomical, and I decided right then that I would not take that risk. The system cost me $42,000 to install. It was a network of hydronic tubes running beneath my driveway and front walkway, heated by a high-efficiency boiler in my garage. When snow fell, sensors detected it and activated the system, keeping the surface just warm enough to prevent accumulation. No shoveling, no salt, no ice. Most importantly, no liability. I was reading the complaint for the 4th time when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brenda Morrison, the HOA president, standing on my heated front steps in her designer winter coat and perfectly styled blonde hair. She was 53 years old according to the neighborhood gossip, but tried to look 35. Her expression was the particular kind of smugness that comes from believing you hold power over others. "Good morning, Quentin," she said in that syrupy voice that people use when they are pretending to be friendly. "I assume you received our letter." "I did. Just now, actually. Want to explain what this is about." She glanced down at my dry, snow-free steps, then back at me. "I think the letter is quite clear. Your excessive energy usage is not in keeping with our community standards. Several neighbors have complained about the steam rising from your driveway during snowfall. It is ostentatious and wasteful." "Ostentatious?" I could not help but laugh. "It is a safety feature, Brenda. Do you know how many slip and fall accidents happen on residential properties in Minnesota every winter?" "That is what snow shovels and ice melt are for," she replied curtly. "Normal solutions that normal people use. Not some extravagant heating system that probably costs hundreds of dollars every time it snows. We have environmental standards in this community, Quentin. This is 2025. We should all be conscious of our carbon footprint." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that getting angry would not help. The system is tied to a high-efficiency boiler. My energy costs are comparable to what most people spend on heating their homes, and more importantly, it is my property. I can heat my driveway if I want to. Brenda's expression hardened. "Actually, you cannot. Not without HOA approval for exterior modifications, which you never sought. And now that we are aware of it, we are requiring you to disable the system and remove it by March 1st. That gives you 6 weeks. You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious. The board voted unanimously." "You have until March 1st, or we will begin assessing daily fines of $100. We will also place a lien on your property if necessary." She turned and walked back down my heated steps, her boots clicking on the dry concrete while everyone else in the neighborhood struggled with ice and snow. I watched her climb into her black Mercedes SUV and drive away, and I felt something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the Minnesota weather. I spent the rest of that morning researching HOA law in Minnesota. What I found was not encouraging. Homeowners associations had broad authority to enforce their covenants, conditions, and restrictions, commonly called CC and Articles. However, they also had limitations. They could not enforce rules retroactively in most cases, and they could not impose rules that violated state or local law. The question was whether my driveway heating system fell into any protected category. I called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen, who had handled the purchase of my house. He listened to my situation and sighed deeply. "Did you get approval before installing the system?" he asked. "I did not think I needed it. It is all beneath the surface. I did not change the appearance of the driveway." "That is going to be a problem, Quentin. The CC and Articles for Willowbrook are pretty comprehensive. Any exterior modification requires Architectural Review Committee approval. The board could argue that the driveway heating system counts as a modification. But I installed it over a year ago. They never said anything. They probably did not know about it until recently. Someone must have complained. Once the HOA is aware of a violation, they have a duty to enforce their rules consistently or risk claims of selective enforcement. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache forming. So what are my options? You could remove the system to avoid the fines. You could fight it and potentially rack up significant penalties while the case works through the legal system, or you could try to convince the board to approve it retroactively. "What are my chances with option 3? Marcus laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Honestly, with someone like Brenda Morrison running the show, maybe 10%, but it is your best shot if you want to keep the system." After hanging up, I decided to take Marcus's advice. I spent the next 2 days preparing a presentation for the HOA board meeting scheduled for the following Thursday. I gathered data on slip and fall accidents in Minnesota, information about premises liability, statistics on my energy usage compared to neighborhood averages, and photographs showing how my system kept the driveway completely clear during the recent snowstorm while other driveways remained hazardous. Thursday evening arrived with another light snowfall. I drove to the community center where the HOA held its monthly meetings, my presentation materials in a leather portfolio. The building was one of those modern structures with too much glass and not enough character, but it had a large meeting room with a projector, which I needed. Brenda sat at the head of a long table with 4 other board members. Patricia Fleming, the vice president, who was 61 and wore her gray hair in a tight bun. Robert Martinez, the treasurer, who was 47 and worked as an accountant. Jennifer Walsh, the secretary, who was 52 and rarely spoke. And David Paulson, a member-at-large who was 55 and owned a plumbing company. About 20 other homeowners were scattered throughout the audience. I recognized most of them from neighborhood events, though I could not claim to know any of them well. Brenda called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. They discussed various community issues for 45 minutes, including landscaping contracts, pool maintenance for the summer, and complaints about someone leaving their garbage cans visible from the street. Finally, Brenda announced, "We now come to the matter of 428 Oakmont Drive and the unauthorized driveway heating system. Quentin Xavier has requested time to address the board." I stood and walked to the front of the room, connecting my laptop to the projector. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I want to explain why I installed this system and why I believe it should be approved rather than removed." I clicked to my first slide, which showed statistics from the National Safety Council. Every year in the United States, Over 1 million people are injured in slip and fall accidents. In Minnesota specifically, we average over 20,000 such injuries annually during winter months. Many of these happen on residential driveways and walkways. Brenda interrupted. We all know that winter is slippery, Quentin. That does not justify your energy waste. If you will let me finish, I will address the energy concerns. I clicked to the next slide. Here is what happened 2 houses down from me in December of 2023, 1 month before I installed my system. Eleanor Hutchinson, age 74, slipped on black ice on her driveway and fractured her hip. She sued the homeowners for inadequate ice removal. The settlement was $68,000, plus the homeowner's insurance rates increased significantly. I had everyone's attention now. I clicked to the next slide showing a photograph of my driveway during a recent snowstorm, completely clear and dry, next to a photograph of my neighbor's driveway covered in snow and ice. My system prevents this liability entirely. There is never ice on my property. Never. And before you say that is what shoveling is for, consider this. Even with diligent shoveling, ice forms. Black ice happens. Snowmelt refreezes. And if someone slips on your property, you are liable. Your homeowner's insurance pays, but then your rates increase. Or worse, if the damages exceed your coverage limits, you pay out of pocket. Robert Martinez leaned forward. What about your energy costs? Brenda said you must be spending hundreds per snowfall. I am glad you asked. I clicked to a detailed breakdown of my utility bills. My natural gas usage is actually below the neighborhood average. The boiler that runs my driveway system is 98% efficient, and it only activates when snow is detected. Last month, with 3 significant snowfalls, my total gas bill was $192. The neighborhood average, according to the utility company data I requested, is $218. Jennifer Walsh spoke up for the first time. How is that possible? Because I installed a high-efficiency boiler for both my home heating and the driveway system. Most homes in this neighborhood have furnaces that are 15 to 20 years old, running at maybe 80% efficiency. My entire heating infrastructure is newer and better. So yes, I heat my driveway, but my overall energy consumption is actually lower than most of you. Brenda's face was reddening. That is beside the point. You did not get approval. You are right, and I apologize for that oversight. I should have sought approval first. But now that it is installed and clearly providing a safety benefit, I am asking for retroactive approval. I am not asking the HOA to pay for anyone else to install these systems. I am simply asking to keep mine. Patricia Fleming raised her hand. What about the steam? Several residents have complained that it looks odd, seeing steam rising from your driveway during snowstorms. The steam is just water vapor, the same thing you see coming from anyone's breath in cold weather. It is not smoke or pollution. It is simply the visual result of warm air meeting cold snowflakes. If the concern is aesthetic, I would point out that my driveway always looks pristine, while many others in the neighborhood have salt stains, snow piles, and ice patches well into spring. I clicked to my final slide, which showed a summary of premises liability law in Minnesota. Here is what I want the board to consider. If you force me to remove this system and someone subsequently gets injured on my property, that is on me. But if someone gets injured on any of your properties, or on common HOA property like our sidewalks and parking areas, that is a liability you all share. Have you considered installing a system like this for our community walkways and the parking lot at this community center? That sparked a murmur among the board members. Clearly, they had not considered it. David Paulson spoke up. What would something like that cost for our common areas? for the main walkways and the community center parking lot, probably around $80,000 to $90,000. But consider that against your potential liability. One serious slip and fall lawsuit could cost the HOA several $100,000, plus legal fees. Your insurance might cover it, but your premiums would skyrocket. Every homeowner in this community would see their HOA fees increase. Brenda stood abruptly. This is a distraction from the issue at hand. Quentin, you violated the CC and Articus by installing an exterior modification without approval. That is a fact. We need to enforce our rules consistently. Then enforce them consistently, I said calmly. How many other homeowners have made exterior modifications without approval? Should we survey the entire neighborhood? Because I can name 5 houses just on my street that have added landscape lighting, changed their mailboxes, or installed decorative elements without seeking architectural review. Brenda's jaw tightened. Those are minor changes. According to what standard? The CC and Articus do not distinguish between minor and major unauthorized changes. They simply require approval for any exterior modification. So either you enforce the rules against everyone, or you recognize that some flexibility is appropriate when the modification provides a clear benefit. The meeting devolved into argument after that. Several homeowners spoke up, some supporting me and others siding with Brenda. One woman, Carol Jennings from 3 streets over, mentioned that she had slipped on her own driveway the previous winter and spent 2 days in the hospital. A man named Paul Henderson argued that if people wanted heated driveways, they should have bought houses in gated communities with such amenities included. After 30 minutes of debate, Brenda called for order. We will take this matter under advisement and vote at our next board meeting. Quentin, you will be notified of our decision within 30 days. And in the meantime, I asked, am I accruing fines? Brenda and the other board members exchanged glances. Robert finally said, we will suspend the fines pending our final decision. That seems fair. I nodded, gathered my materials, and left. It was not the approval I had hoped for, but at least I had bought some time. The next 3 weeks were tense. I continued my research, diving deeper into Minnesota premises liability law and HOA regulations. I discovered several interesting facts. First, Minnesota law requires property owners to maintain their premises in a reasonably safe condition. Second, the state has a specific statute regarding snow and ice removal from public sidewalks adjacent to private property. Third, there have been multiple court cases in Minnesota where HOAs were held liable for injuries on common property due to inadequate snow and ice removal. I compiled all of this into a comprehensive legal memorandum and sent it to every board member, as well as to the HOA's attorney, whose name I found on their corporate filings. I wanted to make sure they understood the full scope of the liability issues at play. What I did not expect was the response from other homeowners. Within days of the meeting, I received 3 phone calls from neighbors asking about my heating system and whether I could recommend the contractor who installed it. Then I got an email from Carol Jennings, the woman who had mentioned her slip and fall accident at the meeting. She wanted to know the exact cost and whether the system could be installed in sections to spread out the expense. But the most interesting contact came from an attorney named Zachary Hoffman. He left a message on my voicemail saying he represented a homeowner in a nearby subdivision who was facing a similar HOA dispute over a safety modification. He wanted to know if I would be willing to share my research and possibly serve as an expert witness if his client's case went to court. I called him back that evening. Zachary turned out to be a real estate and HOA law specialist with an office in downtown Minneapolis. He explained that his client had installed a backup generator system after a winter power outage nearly caused his pipes to freeze and burst, and his HOA was demanding its removal because it was visible from the street. The problem with HOAs, Zachary explained, is that they often focus on aesthetics and control while ignoring practical considerations like safety and liability. Your heated driveway case is actually stronger than most because you can quantify the risk you are preventing. If you would like, I could represent you at no charge in exchange for the right to use your case as precedent for my other clients. Why would you do that? Because I think you are going to win, and I want to be on record as your attorney when you do. Plus, your research is excellent. You have basically done half my work for me. I thought about it for a moment. Marcus Chen was a competent attorney, but he was not an HOA specialist. Zachary was. All right, let us do it. Over the next week, Zachary took over my case. He reviewed all my materials, added his own legal analysis, and prepared a formal response to the HOA's complaint. He also did something I had not thought to do. He submitted a public records request to the city of Edna for all slip and fall injury reports on residential properties in the Willowbrook subdivision over the past 5 years. The results were stunning. In our neighborhood alone, there had been 17 reported slip and fall injuries requiring medical attention. 3 had resulted in lawsuits. The total payout from those lawsuits exceeded $200,000, and that was just the cases that were reported. Many minor injuries never make it into official statistics. Zachary compiled all of this data into a presentation that made my original effort look like amateur hour. He created charts showing injury rates, costs, insurance premium increases, and potential future liability. He included case law from Minnesota and other cold weather states. He even found an expert witness, a civil engineer who specialized in premises liability, willing to testify that heated driveway systems were a reasonable safety measure in climates with significant snow and ice. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for February 20th. Zachary and I arrived 15 minutes early to set up. The room was more crowded this time, at least 40 homeowners in attendance. Word had gotten around that this was going to be interesting. Brenda started the meeting with the usual preliminary business, but I could tell she was anxious to get to my case. Her hands kept fidgeting with her papers, and she kept glancing at Zachary, who sat next to me in an expensive suit that screamed big city lawyer. When we finally reached my agenda item, Brenda cleared her throat. We have received the materials submitted by Mr. Xavier's attorney regarding the driveway heating system. The board has reviewed these materials, and we have consulted with our own legal counsel. Before we vote, does Mr. Xavier or his attorney wish to make any additional statements? Zachary stood. Yes, thank you. My name is Zachary Hoffman, and I am representing Mr. Xavier in this matter. I want to be very clear about what is at stake here, not just for my client but for every homeowner in this community and for the HOA itself. He clicked to his first slide, which showed a photograph of an elderly man on crutches. This is Harold Watkins. He lives 4 streets over from Mr. Xavier. In January of 2023, Mr. Watkins slipped on his icy front steps and shattered his kneecap. He required surgery, months of physical therapy, and still walks with difficulty. His medical bills exceeded $50,000. His homeowner's insurance covered most of it, but his premiums increased by 42% annually. Over 10 years, he will pay an additional $25,000 in increased premiums because of one accident. Next slide. A middle-aged woman. This is Sandra Chen. Different person from my colleague Marcus. No relation. Sandra slipped on the HOA common area sidewalk near the mailboxes in February of 2024. She broke her wrist and suffered a concussion. She sued the HOA. The settlement was $48,000. Every homeowner in this community saw their HOA fees increase by $60 annually to cover the insurance increase. He continued through several more examples, each one driving home the point that slip and fall accidents were not theoretical risks, but actual events with real financial consequences. Now, Zachary said, let us talk about Mr. Xavier's heated driveway system. Since its installation in January of 2024, there have been 0 slip and fall incidents on his property. 0. Meanwhile, on the rest of the properties in this subdivision, there have been 4 reported incidents in that same time period. The statistical correlation is clear. Heated surfaces prevent accidents, Brenda interrupted. But we cannot require everyone to install these systems. They are too expensive. You are absolutely right, Zachary agreed, which is why we are not asking you to require them. We are simply asking you to allow homeowners who choose to invest in this safety measure to do so. Mr. Xavier spent over $40,000 of his own money to protect himself and anyone who sets foot on his property. Rather than penalizing him for this, you should be thanking him. Patricia Fleming raised her hand. But what about the environmental concerns? We have community standards about sustainability. Zachary clicked to an energy usage comparison chart. As Mr. Xavier demonstrated previously, his overall energy consumption is below the neighborhood average. But let us go further. Let us talk about the environmental cost of lawsuits. Every personal injury lawsuit requires hundreds of hours of attorney time, court resources, paper filings, expert witnesses traveling to depositions and trials. The carbon footprint of the legal system is enormous. By preventing accidents, Mr. Xavier is actually reducing the environmental impact of liability litigation. That was a bit of a stretch, but it was clever. I saw several board members nodding. David Paulson spoke up. I have been thinking about what Quentin said at the last meeting about installing a system for our common areas. I asked our insurance carrier for a quote on what our liability coverage costs annually. We pay $32,000 per year. If we could reduce that even by 20%, we would save over $6,000 annually. A heated walkway system for our high-traffic common areas would pay for itself in maybe 15 years, and we would eliminate the risk of lawsuits. Brenda looked annoyed. That is not the issue we are discussing tonight. Actually, it is exactly the issue, Zachary said. Because the board has a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the homeowners. That means managing risk and controlling costs. If you force Mr. Xavier to remove a proven safety system, and he subsequently faces a lawsuit from a slip and fall on his property, he would have grounds to sue the HOA for damages. You would have directly caused his increased liability exposure. That got everyone's attention. Brenda's face went pale. That is absurd. We cannot be held liable for his accidents. Actually, you can, Zachary said calmly. There is a growing body of case law around HOA liability for overly restrictive rules that prevent reasonable safety measures. In Colorado, an HOA was held partially liable when a homeowner's house burned down after the HOA prohibited the installation of a fire suppression sprinkler system due to aesthetic concerns. In Arizona, an HOA was sued when a child drowned in a community pool that lacked certain safety features because the board had rejected them as too expensive. Courts are recognizing that HOAs cannot hide behind their CC and RTCS when their rules create unreasonable safety risks. Brenda looked at the HOA's attorney, a thin man in his 60s who had been sitting quietly in the corner. He nodded slowly. Mr. Hoffman is correct. While the case law is not definitive, there is a trend toward holding HOAs accountable when their rules compromise safety. I would recommend that the board carefully consider the liability implications. The room fell silent. I could see Brenda struggling with this. She clearly wanted to assert the HOA's authority, but she was smart enough to recognize a losing position when she saw one. Finally, Robert Martinez said, "I move that we grant retroactive approval for Mr. Xavier's driveway heating system and amend our CC and RTCS to explicitly allow such systems for any homeowner who wishes to install one, subject to meeting current building codes and obtaining proper permits from the city." "I second that motion," David Paulson said immediately. Brenda looked like she had bitten into a lemon. "All in favor?" 4 hands went up: Robert, David, Patricia, and Jennifer. Only Brenda voted against it. "The motion passes," Brenda said through clenched teeth. "Mr. Xavier, your system is approved. This meeting is adjourned." I shook Zachary's hand as the room erupted in conversation. Several homeowners came up to congratulate me and ask for information about installing their own systems. Carol Jennings gave me a hug. Even David Paulson came over to shake my hand and apologize for not speaking up sooner. But Brenda was not done with me yet. 2 weeks later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that I was being assessed a special fine of $5,000 for retroactive architectural review processing fees related to my driveway heating system. The letter cited a provision in the CC and RTCS that allowed the board to charge reasonable administrative fees for processing late or retroactive approval requests. I called Zachary immediately. He laughed when I read him the letter. "She is not going to let this go, is she?" he said. "Apparently not. Can she do this?" "Technically, yes. There is a provision for administrative fees, but $5,000 is not reasonable for processing a retroactive approval. It is clearly punitive. We can fight it." "Well, fighting it cost me more than $5,000 in legal fees." Zachary was quiet for a moment. "Normally, yes, but I have an idea. Let me make some calls." The next day, Zachary called me back with interesting news. He had contacted a reporter at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune who covered consumer issues and HOA disputes. The reporter, Angela Simmons, was very interested in my story. She wanted to interview me and write an article about HOA overreach and the tension between safety and control. "Are you comfortable with that?" Zachary asked. "Once it goes public, there is no taking it back." I thought about Brenda's smug face when she handed me that $5,000 fine. "Let us do it." Angela Simmons came to my house 3 days later. She was in her mid-30s, sharp and professional, with a notebook full of questions. I told her the whole story, showed her the heated driveway system in operation, and gave her copies of all the documentation about slip and fall accidents in the neighborhood. She also interviewed Zachary and several of my neighbors, including Carol Jennings, who spoke passionately about her own slip and fall injury. The article ran on the front page of the Metro section on March 3rd, under the headline, "Edna Man Fights HOA Over Safety Device. Heated Driveway Prevents Falls but Generates Heat from Neighbors." It was well written and fair, presenting both sides but clearly implying that the HOA was being unreasonable. The article mentioned the $5,000 retroactive fee and quoted Zachary calling it clearly punitive and likely unenforceable. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The article was shared thousands of times on social media. Local television stations picked up the story. I did interviews with 3 different TV news crews, each time standing on my dry, snow-free driveway while other homes in the background showed the usual winter mess. The publicity put enormous pressure on the HOA board. Brenda received dozens of emails and phone calls from angry homeowners demanding her resignation. The Star Tribune ran a follow-up article about HOA reform, using my case as the lead example. A state legislator from a nearby district announced she was introducing a bill to limit HOA authority over safety-related home improvements. 10 days after the first article ran, I received a letter from the HOA board. This one was much more conciliatory in tone. It informed me that after further review, the board had decided to waive the $5,000 administrative fee in recognition of the unique circumstances of this case and Mr. Xavier's cooperation throughout the process. It was not an apology, but it was a complete surrender. I had won. But the story was not over yet. In late March, I was contacted by 3 different contractors who specialized in radiant heating systems. The publicity from my case had generated massive interest in heated driveways throughout the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. All 3 contractors wanted to offer me a referral fee for any customers I sent their way. I agreed to partner with one of them, a company called Northern Comfort Systems that had been in business for 20 years and had excellent reviews. I created a simple website explaining my experience and linking to information about heated driveway installation. Within 2 months, I had referred 18 homeowners, 8 of them from my own subdivision. My referral fees totaled over $11,000, more than covering my legal expenses and the installation costs I had incurred. But more importantly, the safety benefits were real. The following winter, during a particularly severe ice storm in January of 2026, I received a phone call from David Paulson. He was calling from the hospital. "Quentin, I wanted to let you know that we have been approved by the board to install radiant heating on all the HOA common area walkways," he said. "Your presentation and everything that happened convinced us it was the right thing to do. We are breaking ground next month." "That is great news, David, but why are you calling me from the hospital? Are you okay?" He laughed, but it sounded pained. "I am fine." "Well, I will be fine. I slipped on my own driveway this morning and broke my ankle. I should have installed one of those heating systems when I had the chance. I am calling from the emergency room while they wait for the orthoptist. I wanted to tell you that you were right, and I was an idiot for not listening sooner. I am getting a heated driveway installed as soon as I can walk again. I am sorry you got hurt, David, but I am glad you called. Take care of yourself." That conversation stuck with me. David was a reasonably intelligent guy, a successful business owner, and he still had not taken the safety precautions necessary, despite having all the information. It made me realize that most people do not think about risk until after something bad happens. In May of 2026, Brenda Morrison resigned as HOA president. The official reason given was that she was pursuing other interests, but everyone knew the real reason was that she had become toxic to the community. Her hardline approach and the public embarrassment from the newspaper articles had made her position untenable. Patricia Fleming took over as president, and one of the first things she did was create a new committee focused on community safety and risk management. She asked me to serve on it, and I agreed. Over the next year, we implemented several changes to the HOA's approach to home modifications. We created a streamlined approval process for safety-related improvements. We updated the CC and Articus to explicitly allow heated driveways, backup generators, security systems, and other safety devices. We also installed radiant heating on the common area walkways, the community center parking lot, and the pool deck area that tended to get slippery in winter. The results were measurable. In the winter of 2026-2027, our subdivision had 0 reported slip and fall injuries on HOA property, and only 2 on private property, both at homes that had not installed any enhanced safety measures. Our insurance premiums actually decreased for the first time in 5 years, saving every homeowner money on their HOA fees. By early 2027, 12 homes in Willowbrook had installed heated driveways. Another 7 had installed heated front walkways, but not full driveway systems due to cost. The neighborhood had become known in the area as the safe subdivision, and property values increased noticeably. Real estate agents were specifically mentioning the low accident rate and safety-focused HOA as selling points. But the most satisfying moment came in March of 2027, almost exactly 3 years after I had first installed my heating system. I was at a neighborhood barbecue when Carol Jennings came up to me with tears in her eyes. "I want to thank you," she said. "My mother is 83 years old and she lives with me. This winter, she would have been terrified to go outside with all the ice. She fell 3 years ago and has never fully recovered her confidence. But with the heated walkway we installed, she walks outside every day. She feeds the birds, checks the mail, and just enjoys being able to move around without fear. You gave her that freedom back." That was when I realized that this whole fight had been about more than just winning an argument with an overzealous HOA president. It was about making life genuinely better and safer for people in my community. The money I saved on potential liability was nice. The vindication of being proven right was satisfying. But seeing an elderly woman regain her independence, because she was not afraid of falling on the ice, was what really mattered. In the summer of 2027, I was asked to speak at a national HOA conference in Chicago about balancing safety and community standards. I stood in front of 300 HOA board members from across the country and told my story. The reception was mixed. Some board members understood immediately and approached me afterward with questions about implementing similar policies in their communities. Others were defensive, insisting that their CC and Articus were necessary to maintain property values and community aesthetics. But I noticed something interesting. Many of the defensive ones were from warm weather states like Florida and Arizona, where slip and fall accidents on ice were not a concern. The board members from cold weather states, places like Michigan, Wisconsin, and upstate New York, were overwhelmingly interested and supportive. They dealt with the same liability issues I had faced, and they recognized that my solution was practical and effective. After my presentation, a woman approached me who introduced herself as Dorothy Simmons from a subdivision in Buffalo, New York. She explained that her HOA was facing almost the exact same situation I had dealt with, but with an interesting twist. One of her neighbors had installed not just a heated driveway, but also a heated roof system to prevent ice dams, which are a major problem in areas with heavy snow. The HOA was demanding removal of both systems. "Can I hire your attorney?" she asked. I gave her Zachary's contact information, and he ended up representing her neighbor successfully. That case set another precedent, this time specifically for heated roof systems. Over the next year, Zachary built a thriving practice focusing on HOA disputes over safety modifications. He represented homeowners fighting to install backup generators, security systems, emergency access gates, and various other safety features that HOAs tried to prohibit. He won most of his cases. As for me, life settled into a comfortable routine. I continued my work as a risk management consultant, which had only become more interesting after my personal experience with premises liability. I actually incorporated my HOA dispute into my professional presentations, using it as a case study in risk identification and mitigation. My relationship with the Willowbrook HOA improved dramatically under Patricia Fleming's leadership. We were not friends exactly, but we had mutual respect. The safety committee I served on met quarterly and actually accomplished useful things. We organized neighborhood snow removal help for elderly residents who could not shovel themselves. We negotiated group discounts with contractors for homeowners who wanted to install safety improvements. We even created a community emergency preparedness plan. Brenda Morrison moved out of the neighborhood in the fall of 2027. I heard through the grapevine that she had divorced her husband and relocated to Arizona. I felt no particular satisfaction in that. She had been frustrating to deal with, but I did not wish her ill. She was just someone who had gotten too wrapped up in the power of her position and lost sight of what actually mattered. In the winter of 2027-2028, we had one of the worst ice storms in Minnesota history. Power lines came down, roads were impassable, and the entire Minneapolis area ground to a halt for 3 days. My heated driveway system, powered by my natural gas boiler, kept working throughout the outage. I was able to help elderly neighbors get to my house where it was warm, and emergency vehicles could actually access our street because my driveway provided a safe turnaround point when other driveways were sheets of ice. The local news covered the storm extensively, and one enterprising reporter remembered my story from the previous year. They came back to interview me about how my system performed during the crisis. The resulting story showed my clear driveway next to the ice-covered streets and highlighted how safety modifications could make a real difference during emergencies. That story generated even more interest in heated driveways and other safety systems. Northern Comfort Systems, the contractor I partnered with, had to hire additional staff to keep up with demand. My referral fees for that year exceeded $30,000. I donated half of it to a local charity that helped low-income elderly residents with home safety modifications. By 2028, the heated driveway dispute was firmly in my past, but its effects continued to ripple outward. The Minnesota State Legislature passed a law limiting HOA authority over safety-related home modifications. The law required HOAs to have a clear and compelling reason for denying any modification that enhanced safety, and it placed the burden of proof on the HOA rather than the homeowner. Zachary had testified in favor of the law, citing my case as an example of HOA overreach. Similar laws were introduced in several other cold-weather states. Some passed, some failed, but the conversation had shifted. People were starting to recognize that HOAs, while useful for maintaining community standards, could not be allowed to compromise safety in the name of aesthetics or uniformity. In March of 2028, exactly 4 years after my initial dispute with Brenda, I received a letter from the National Community Associations Institute, the largest organization representing HOAs and homeowners. They were awarding me their annual Community Impact Award for promoting positive change in how HOAs approach safety and risk management. The letter invited me to their annual conference in Las Vegas to receive the award. I attended the conference with my girlfriend Zara Reynolds, whom I had started dating 6 months earlier. She was a civil engineer who worked on municipal infrastructure projects, and she found the whole HOA controversy fascinating from a professional standpoint. We had met at a professional networking event, when she approached me after learning about my heated driveway case and wanted to discuss the engineering principles involved. The awards ceremony was held in a massive ballroom with over 1,000 attendees. When they called my name, I walked up to the stage feeling slightly surreal. 4 years earlier, I had been facing daily fines and threats of a property lien for trying to make my property safer. Now, I was receiving an award from the very industry that had fought against me. In my acceptance speech, I kept it simple. 4 years ago, I installed a heated driveway because I did not want anyone to get hurt on my property. That decision led to conflict, publicity, legal battles, and eventually meaningful change. What I learned is that safety should never be controversial. When we prioritize keeping people safe over maintaining arbitrary rules, everyone benefits. HOAs have an important role in maintaining communities, but that role must include protecting residents from preventable harm. Thank you for recognizing that principle with this award. The applause was genuine and sustained. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached me to share their own stories of HOA disputes over safety modifications. Many thanked me for fighting my case publicly and creating a precedent that helped them win their own battles. Flying home from Las Vegas, I reflected on how much had changed in 4 years. What started as a simple safety modification had turned into a community-wide transformation, state legislation, a thriving side business, and ultimately national recognition. None of that had been my goal. I just wanted to prevent slip and fall accidents on my property. But sometimes standing up for common sense and refusing to back down when you are right can create ripple effects far beyond what you imagine. My heated driveway was not just about melting snow. It was about establishing the principle that safety matters more than conformity, that reasonable people can disagree with unreasonable rules, and that fighting for what is right, even when it is difficult and expensive, is worthwhile. As we landed in Minneapolis, I looked out at the snow-covered landscape and smiled. Somewhere down there was my house with its heated driveway, warm and safe and completely clear of ice. And scattered throughout the neighborhood were a dozen other homes with similar systems, installed by homeowners who decided that safety was worth the investment. Brenda Morrison had said my heated driveway was wasteful and ostentatious. She was wrong. It was practical, effective, and ultimately life-changing for many people beyond just myself. And that made every dollar spent, every hour of research, every contentious meeting, and every moment of stress completely worthwhile. The fight over my heated driveway taught me something important about America in 2025 and beyond. We live in communities, and communities require rules, but those rules must serve the people, not control them. When rules become more important than the well-being of residents, it is time to change the rules. And sometimes one person, standing up for a simple principle, can make that change happen.